Let me tell you about a week in January 2026 that I think is going to be studied for a very long time. The Winter Olympics were about to open in Milan. Thousands of athletes from around the world were arriving in Italy, lacing up their skates, waxing their skis, dreaming about medals. And in the background, like a drumbeat that nobody wanted to hear but everybody could feel, there was this question hanging in the air. What does it mean to compete under the American flag when the American government is doing what it's doing right now? That question isn't abstract. It isn't a thought experiment. It is the lived reality of U.S. cross-country skier Ben Ogden, who stood at a press conference in Milan days before the opening ceremony and said, out loud, that there are aspects of being American I'm not proud of. A 20-something athlete, representing his country at the biggest stage in the world, feeling the need to distance himself from his own government before the first race had even been run. That is where we are, and I want to walk you through exactly how we got here, because I think the full picture, the nuclear piece, the Olympics piece, the geopolitical piece, is more alarming than any one headline has captured. When you put it all together, you get a portrait of an administration that is dismantling decades of international order, often by accident, sometimes by design, and almost always without fully thinking through the consequences. So let's start with the bomb, literally. On October 30th, 2025, Donald Trump was on Marine One, flying toward an airport in South Korea, where he was about to sit down for a summit with Xi Jinping, the president of China. This was supposed to be a stabilizing moment, a meeting between the leaders of the two largest economies on Earth, at a time of enormous tension. The kind of diplomatic event where everything is choreographed, where every word is weighed, where the whole point is to project calm and predictability. And then Trump picked up his phone and posted on Truth Social that the United States would resume nuclear weapons testing for the first time in 33 years. Let that number land. 33 years. The last time this country detonated a nuclear device was 1992. We have honored a moratorium on nuclear testing through Republican and Democratic administrations alike, through the Cold War ending, through 9/11, through every geopolitical upheaval of the modern era. That moratorium has been a cornerstone of the global non-proliferation system, the set of agreements and norms that keeps the number of nuclear-armed nations from multiplying. Trump blew it up with a social media post, written on a helicopter, minutes before meeting the leader of China. According to CNN's reporting, the directive took even many of Trump's own advisors off guard. Hours after he posted it, the Pentagon was not moving swiftly to carry it out. The senior military officer nominated to oversee America's nuclear arsenal said he was not reading anything into the Truth Social post, a remarkable thing for a general to say publicly about a direct instruction from his commander-in-chief. Think about what that tells you. The people who are supposed to execute this president's orders on nuclear weapons were treating his nuclear weapons order as noise, as something to be waited out, as something that might not be real. That should terrify you. Not because the testing necessarily happens, though it might, but because the unpredictability itself is the danger. Nuclear strategy is, at its core, about credibility and signaling. When adversaries cannot tell the difference between a genuine strategic shift and a presidential impulse vented on social media, you have destabilized something that cannot easily be restabilized. And Xi Jinping, the man Trump was about to meet, was watching. His military had just paraded nuclear-capable DF-5C missiles through Tiananmen Square a month earlier. China is building its nuclear arsenal at what U.S. defense officials have called a breathtaking speed. And now the American president had just announced, while flying to shake his hand, that the old rules no longer apply. The Atlantic Council, in an extensive brief on nuclear priorities, was blunt. The mere suggestion of resumed U.S. testing could give China a green light to resume its own explosive testing, and China would benefit comparatively more from that than the United States. There is, these experts said, no technical reason for the U.S. to be doing this right now. So why is he doing it? That is the question I keep coming back to, and I don't think there's a clean answer. Part of it is the Project 2025 blueprint, the 920, Page Heritage Foundation document that called for preparing to resume nuclear testing. Part of it is Trump's deep-seated belief, going back decades, that America only gets respect through displays of maximum force. Part of it is that in the Trump worldview, restraint is weakness, and weakness is the only thing he truly fears. But here's what I want you to understand. The consequences of this are not abstract. They ripple outward, into treaties, into alliances, into something as seemingly unrelated as who gets to compete at the Olympics. Because the nuclear testing announcement didn't happen in isolation, it happened against a backdrop of the Trump administration systematically shredding the arms control architecture that the entire world has relied on since the end of the Cold War. The new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty New START expired on February 5, 2026. That was the last binding agreement limiting the number of deployed strategic nuclear warheads between the United States and Russia. It took decades to build. It was verified. It worked. And now it is gone. Foreign Policy magazine, in an analysis published just this month, put it plainly. The president has presided over the slow, lingering decay of the last remnants of post-Cold War arms control, culminating in the effective death of New START. Trump says he wants a better deal, one that includes China, not just Russia. That's a reasonable goal in theory, but he tried that in his first term. He failed. And this time, as the Brookings Institution noted, his proposed Golden Dome missile defense system, a space-based shield intended to intercept missiles from Russia and China, is going to make any arms control negotiation exponentially harder, because no adversary will agree to limit their offensive weapons while we're building an unlimited defensive system. Initial cost estimates for the Golden Dome exceed $500 billion. $500 billion. For comparison, that is more than the entire GDP of Belgium. And based on the history of missile defense programs, those costs will only go up. Meanwhile, domestically, the administration has been rewriting the nuclear rulebook in ways that haven't gotten nearly enough attention. In January 2026, NPR obtained documents showing that the Trump administration had quietly overhauled a set of nuclear safety directives shared with private companies it regulates without making them public. The changes included ending the ALARA principle as low as reasonably achievable, which has been the standard for minimizing radiation exposure since the dawn of the nuclear age. The former chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, fired by Trump, said the administration was taking a wrecking ball to the system of nuclear safety oversight that has kept this country from another 3 Mile Island. All of this, the testing announcement, the death of New START, the secret safety rewrites, the Golden Dome fantasy, is the nuclear context. And it is the context in which the world's athletes arrived in Milan in February 2026 wearing their national flags, many of them looking across the ice at the Americans and asking, "What kind of country is this now?" Let's talk about Venezuela, because that's the story that most directly triggered the Olympic crisis. The Trump administration conducted more than 20 strikes in Latin American waters as part of what it called a crackdown on drug traffickers. Whether or not you support aggressive counter-narcotics operations, the scale and nature of these strikes sparked international outrage, particularly in Europe and Latin America. And in their wake, calls began to mount, including from a cross-party group of members of parliament in the United Kingdom for international sporting bodies to consider expelling the United States from major competitions until it demonstrated, quote, clear compliance with international law and respect for the sovereignty of other nations. This was not a fringe position. It was a formal parliamentary motion. In the UK, and the International Olympic Committee had to respond. Their statement, released in January 2026, was carefully worded. They would not ban American athletes from the Winter Games in Milan. The IOC, true to its institutional character, invoked its principle of political neutrality, the same principle it has used for decades to keep sport distinct from geopolitics. For this reason, the statement read, the IOC cannot involve itself directly in political matters or conflicts between countries, as these fall outside our remit. This is the realm of politics. But here's what I want you to notice about what the IOC did not say. They did not say America's conduct was acceptable. They did not dismiss the concerns. They issued a statement at all, which is remarkable. They are not in the habit of issuing statements about specific nations' foreign policies ahead of their own Olympics. The fact that they felt compelled to address this publicly tells you something about the temperature in the room. And the temperature in the room, the actual room, the Milan room, where IOC members were gathered in early February, was described by reporters as tense. There was open discussion about whether the American delegation might face jeers at the opening ceremony. Vice President Vance was in the stands. Athletes were being asked, at press conferences, how they felt about representing their country at this moment. That is not normal. That has not been normal for American athletes since the height of the Iraq War protests, maybe. And even then, it didn't quite reach this level. Now here's where it gets even more complicated, and where I think the stakes become truly enormous. The 2028 Summer Olympics are scheduled for Los Angeles. The largest peacetime gathering in the history of the world. That's how the chair of the LA28 Organizing Committee, Casey Wasserman, describes it is supposed to happen in a city that the federal government of the United States has, in multiple ways, declared war upon. I don't use that phrase loosely. In 2025, the Trump administration deployed National Guard troops to Los Angeles to respond to immigration protests. The Department of Homeland Security, which includes ICE and Border Patrol, has conducted operations in the city without warrants. Federal officials explicitly threatened to arrest the mayor and the governor. The transportation secretary linked federal control of Los Angeles directly to the Olympics, saying that the city's leadership of immigration protests was a preview of their leadership ahead of the Games, and we have bigger problems. Trump signed an executive order creating an Olympic task force with himself as chair, promising to do anything necessary to keep the Olympics safe, including deploying the military. He threatened, publicly, to move the Games out of Los Angeles if he felt the city wasn't being managed properly, even though he has no legal authority to do that. Even though the IOC, not the U.S. president, controls where the Olympics are held. At the IOC session in Milan in early February 2026, American officials had to appear before the full committee and essentially beg for reassurance. USOPC Chairman Gene Sykes told the assembled members, "The United States remains fully committed to the independence, the integrity, and global mission of the Olympic and Paralympic movement." Casey Wasserman told them Los Angeles was a reflection of the world itself. Neither of them mentioned Trump by name. They didn't have to. Everyone in the room knew what they were responding to. And here's what I keep thinking about. The IOC has a precedent for stripping a nation of its hosting rights. Not a common one, not one used lightly, but it exists. And the conditions that would trigger it host government interference in the independence of the Games, credible concerns about athletes' safety, systematic visa denials for participating nations are conditions that the Trump administration has, in various ways, already gestured toward. Trump's travel ban has raised real questions about whether athletes and fans from the 19 countries currently under visa restrictions will be able to attend the 2028 Games. Iran is on that list. Cuba is on that list. These are countries with proud Olympic traditions. Their athletes qualifying for Los Angeles and then being denied entry would be, under the Olympic Charter, a serious violation. The IOC already declared Indonesia in breach of the Charter for denying visas to Israeli athletes and said all discussion of Indonesia hosting a future Olympics was terminated. Apply that standard consistently. Apply it to a country that bans athletes from 19 nations. Apply it to a host city where the federal government is running immigration sweeps. And then tell me why the 2028 Olympics are going to be fine. I want to be clear about something. I am not arguing that the Olympics should leave Los Angeles. I am arguing that the Trump administration's actions have created a genuine crisis of confidence around one of the most prestigious events in the world, and that the full weight of that crisis is not being reported as the single story it is. We are treating the nuclear testing announcement as one story, the death of New Start as another, the Venezuela strikes as another, the Olympic ban calls as another, the ICE raids in Los Angeles as another, the travel bans as another. But they are all the same story. They are all chapters in the story of an administration that has decided that American power means freedom from obligation, freedom from treaties, freedom from international law, freedom from the basic norms of diplomatic behavior that the United States itself helped construct after World War II. And the Olympic movement, for all its flaws, and it has many, is one of the institutions built on those norms. It is built on the idea that even adversaries can share a starting line, that even during the Cold War, American and Soviet athletes could compete in the same pool. That sport is a space where human beings can, for a few weeks, be human beings first and nationals second. That idea is fragile. It has always been fragile. The 1936 Berlin Olympics were weaponized by a fascist regime. The 1980 and 1984 Olympics were gutted by boycotts. The 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics were held while China was committing documented atrocities in Xinjiang. The Olympics have never been clean. They have never been fully separate from politics. But there is a difference between the games being touched by politics and the games being commanded by politics. There is a difference between a host nation that is flawed and a host nation whose president has explicitly said he will use the games to consolidate his power and whose administration has made credible moves toward doing exactly that. The arms control community has been sounding the alarm for a year now. Senator Ed Markey, in December 2025, reintroduced the HALT Act, the Hastening Arms Limitation Talks Act, alongside a bipartisan group of senators and representatives. It would create a 21st-century framework for freezing the testing, production, and deployment of nuclear weapons. In October 2025, he introduced the No Nuclear Testing Act, which would use Congress's power of the purse to block Trump from restarting nuclear detonations. In November, he wrote to the administration urging it not to restart the program. He has been persistent, and he has been largely ignored. Because here is the hard truth about the moment we are in. The checks on this administration's nuclear adventurism are weakening. New START is dead. The Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which the United States signed but never ratified, provides no binding legal constraint on American behavior. The HALT Act has no chance of passing a Republican-controlled Senate. And the President of the United States has demonstrated, repeatedly, that he will make nuclear policy decisions on the basis of impulse, tweeted from a helicopter, rather than deliberation. Meanwhile, the people who are supposed to be advising him are operating in an environment where the National Security Council has been gutted, where career diplomats have been purged, where the nuclear regulatory apparatus is being secretly rewritten to accelerate a timeline that even its own internal critics call dangerously fast. The Department of Energy wants 3 new experimental nuclear reactors to achieve criticality to go nuclear, in the most literal sense, by July 4, 2026. July 4th, they chose that date deliberately. It is a political target date, not an engineering target date. And they are achieving it by ending the ALARA safety standard, by rewriting rules in secret, by removing oversight that took decades to build. This is the administration that will be hosting the 2028 Olympics. I want to end with something that I think cuts to the heart of why all of this matters beyond the policy specifics. There's a phrase that gets used a lot in Olympic rhetoric. The Games are a beacon of hope. The IOC uses it. The host city organizers use it. Athletes use it. And like a lot of Olympic rhetoric, it can sound hollow, especially when you're aware of the corruption, the doping scandals, the displacement of communities to build venues, the way the Games have been used by authoritarian governments to launder their reputations. But here's the thing. Beacons don't have to be perfect to be necessary. A lighthouse doesn't need to be beautiful. It just needs to be visible. And what is being asked of the Olympic movement right now, what is being demanded of it, is to remain visible. To insist that there is still a space in this world where a 19-year-old from Iran and a 19-year-old from the United States can stand on the same ice and race each other and be, for that moment, nothing more than 2 athletes. The IOC's decision not to ban America from the 2026 Winter Games was, in one sense, a failure of accountability. The United States conducted military strikes in Latin America. It has openly flouted international norms. And the IOC looked at all of that and said, not our department. But in another sense, it was the IOC doing the only thing it knows how to do, trying to keep that space open, trying to insist that the ice remains neutral even when the world around it is not. The question for 2028 is whether that insistence will hold. Whether the IOC will be able to maintain its position of principled neutrality when the host government is run by a man who has explicitly said he intends to make the games about himself. When the federal agencies securing the event answer to an administration that views diversity and globalism as threats. When athletes from dozens of countries are wondering whether they'll be allowed through customs, whether ICE agents will be at the venues, whether the government of the host city is actually in control of the host city. These are not hypothetical concerns. They are the questions that IOC members asked out loud in Milan. They are the questions that LA28 officials had to answer in February 2026, in a room full of people who were not yet sure they trusted the answers. I don't know how this ends. I don't know if the 2028 Olympics go forward as planned, or get moved, or get boycotted, or somehow, through the heroic work of athletes and organizers and city officials who are trying to do the right thing despite their national government, become exactly what they're supposed to be. What I do know is this: the stakes of the next 2 years of American politics are not just domestic. They are written in the faces of athletes standing at a press conference in Milan, searching for words to describe what it feels like to love their country and be ashamed of it at the same time. They are written in the silence of a Pentagon that received a nuclear testing order from its commander-in-chief and didn't know whether to take it seriously. They are written in the expiration of the last treaty limiting the 2 largest nuclear arsenals on Earth, allowed to lapse without replacement, without negotiation, without a plan. This is what it looks like when a great power decides it is above the rules it helped write, and the world, athletes included, is watching.